Hey there everyone, this is Samuel Johnson and welcome back to the MCU Perspectives. And today we're going to be discussing the 29th film to be released as part of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Thor, Love and Thunder. And I want to apologize in advance if there's going to be any technical difficulties while I'm doing this vlog. If you've been watching my Steven Universe vlogs and you know that I have recently gotten a new puppy, she's still a bit energetic and hyper at the time that I'm recording this, so she may end up just doing random puppy shenanigans while I'm recording. And at that time, I'll probably pause the video and stop what I'm doing. So I just wanted to give a heads up so so that doesn't come out of left field for any of you. So there, yeah. But anyway, before I start talking about Love and Thunder, I should probably talk about my thoughts on the previous Thor films. And now, my opinions on each of them tend to vary and change. And for the first Thor film, I thought it was ultimately a pretty good movie. Not perfect, but still a fun ride, and honestly had a lot of interesting and awesome stuff about it that I thought really worked. But ultimately, I felt what held it back was the middle section with Thor in his civilian and when he was on Earth, as I felt that part just kind of felt lesser than the rest of the movie, and as a result, it really did not feel as grand as the film should have been. Sorry, popcorn. Then we have Thor: The Dark World, which unfortunately was a downgrade in the worst way possible. As the story felt kind of bland, the villains were honestly just dull. Any new stuff we got really wasn't that creative or interesting. And if we did see any of the old stuff that we saw from previous films that were supposed to be big and unique, they instead felt smaller and not as creative as when we first saw them. And and on top of that, combined with a story that honestly just kind of felt rushed and didn't really have anything to it, and it really ultimately felt like a very lackluster movie that, in terms of cinematic films, if we consider the MCU to be the world's most expensive TV show, The Dark World was just filler. Ultimately, I wouldn't call it a complete failure, as the film still did have some aspects about it that I felt did work, like Thor and Loki's continuing relationship, adding to the Infinity Gauntlet arc, and the death of Thor's mother. But ultimately, again, I just thought it was dull, and I couldn't wait to get it over with. But then with that said, then we get to Thor Ragnarok, and there's a dog barking. And oh my god, did Thor Ragnarok feel like an improvement. Everything about it, I felt, was just so much better than the previous Thor films. There was a lot more creativity with the new worlds, with the new presence, with the new character arcs, with how they introduced certain characters and the depths they went into. The action was amazing. The humor was beyond fantastic. And overall, for the longest time, I considered it my favorite MCU film until Spider-Man No Way Home came out. Just overall, I thought Ragnarok was just a really damn good movie. And a lot of that quality, I felt, could be attributed to the director of the film at the time, Taika Waititi, who I knew from What We Do in the Shadows fame. But if you know who he is, then you'll know that he's got his hands in a lot of comedic stuff and works. And a lot of them really do work and are a lot of fun, really clever and unique and funny. And as a result, he brought a lot of charm with him when he did Thor Ragnarok. So when I heard that the fourth Thor film was going to be made and that he was going to be directing that as well, honestly, I was excited. I thought the film would... I loved Ragnarok, so I thought maybe Love and Thunder... When this film was advertised, I thought, oh, this should be really cool. On top of that, as more details about the movie came out, I was honest to God excited. She just jumped on the bed. And especially when they revealed that certain characters would be coming back and be taking on different roles, I honestly made me excited for what they were going to be doing for the movie. And as a result, everything about it just made me want to see it more and more. And so as it kept coming closer, I was just kind of hyped. I was ready to go see it. And then reactions to the film came out. And it was very mixed. Some people honestly had a good time and enjoyed it, while others just thought it was a piece of crap that really was a sign that the MCU was losing its luster, so to speak. I'll give you a nickel for every time I've heard that. And as a result, a lot of the hype that I felt about the movie started to die a little. It didn't ruin the movie for me, because I was still interested in seeing it, but I was also wondering, what about this movie made people so angry? What about it made them not want to see it? Hold on one second. Again, sorry, technical, like, again, puppy shenanigans. But like I said, it made me wonder, why were people so mixed when it came to this movie? Why did it deserve those reactions? Did it deserve to be shunned? Well, ultimately I did go see it because I was still naturally curious, and let's just say that I began to understand the negativity more than I would have liked. That doesn't mean I hated the movie, far from it. But with that being said, I can understand why people had the reactions the way they did to this movie. What do I mean by that? Well, let's talk about it and find out. And just again, a heads up, spoilers abound. At the time that I'm recording this, the film has only been out in theaters for 2 weeks, so if you have not seen the film yet and don't want to go in spoiled, turn away now. I'm going to be spoiling it rotten. But as part of these vlogs, I like to go over every single major plot detail, so I'm not going to leave a single detail uncovered, especially the big ones. So if, again, don't want to go unspoiled, turn away. Are we good? Alright, let's get to the spoiler-free plot summary. In this case, in terms of continuity, this film takes place sometime after the events of Endgame, and as we saw at the end of Endgame, Thor went off to go travel the universe with the Guardians of the Galaxy. In that time, essentially, Thor just kept going around doing all the things that he was supposed to be doing. Fighting bad guys, saving lives, essentially just doing his regular Thor antics with the Guardians by his side. And on top of that, as part of his workout routine, so to speak, he did get in shape and did return back to the body that we all know him in. Sorry, still digesting popcorn. However, hell, by the time this movie takes place, Thor and the Guardians are actually on a planet defending this species whose sacred holy temple has been invaded by marauders. Ultimately, Thor, with the Guardians' help, does manage to fend back the invading armies, though it does end up destroying the temple, much to the chagrin of the people in charge. However, they're still grateful that Thor beat them back, and so as thanks, they give him 2 giant goats. Which, what I love is that when they give them to him, they actually say, no take backsies, so yeah, it's just as much as a payback as it is a thanks. Also, Korg is with Thor. I forgot to mention that. Korg is actually now traveling with Thor, for some reason. And he's meant to be kind of sort of the comedic relief. I'll get to my thoughts on that at the end. But put simply, this attack is actually one of many that have been happening across the universe. As once the Guardians and Thor all get themselves reorganized, it turns out they're picking up a lot of distress signals that are happening from all across the galaxy. And all of them have one thing in common. Gods are dying. And all of them seem to mention something about a god butcher, especially one that's actually from Sif, who it turns out is alive. So yeah, she did not die during the events of Ragnarok, thank God. As such, with all the distress signals that are going out across the galaxy, Thor and the Guardians decide that they need to split up, with the Guardians dealing with any of the places that have had attacks, while Thor wants to go and check on Sif. Though it does lead to kind of a little heart-to-heart between Thor and Star-Lord, as Peter does state that apparently Thor has been keeping people at a distance because his heart's been broken in the past. And even Thor confirms it, but he does say that, yeah, but Star-Lord does give him some decent advice and says, I fell in love too and I had my heart broken and it feels shitty, but it's better to fall in love and feel shitty than to never fall in love at all. He kind of says it more dumbly, but the sentiment is still there, and with that in mind, the Guardians take off in their ship while Thor, Korg, and the goats all take the Bifrost to where Lady Sif is, and sure enough, yeah, there's kind of a massacre. There's a giant beast there, which is supposed to be the god of this planet, and it's dead. This is why I have a drink. Turning into gold dust. Sif is thankfully still alive, but she has faced massive damage as she's now missing an arm. Thor goes to check on her, and he asks her what she was doing here, and it turns out that Sif has actually been on the tail of this god butcher. And unfortunately, as you can see, he's gotten away, and his next target is Asgard. And sure enough, that's when we get our villain for the piece, Gorr the God Butcher. Now this guy requires a bit of explanation, especially since they actually show his backstory at the beginning of the movie. Put simply, Gorr was the disciple of some god whose name I don't remember, And for the longest time, he was a devout disciple. He worshipped his god unquestioningly, like so many others. And when things were good, he gave thanks. And when things were bad, he prayed for a miracle. And unfortunately, things got really bad. The whatever planet or plane of existence he lived on, unfortunately, just kind of started to dry up. Food started becoming scarce. Their water was starting to dry up, and it got to the point where a lot of people died, including Gore's daughter, who unfortunately died in his arms. However, as Gore continued wandering the vast deserts of what was once his world, he began to hear a voice whispering to him, calling out. And that voice led him to an oasis where there was plenty of food, plenty of water. Essentially, it looked like just paradise. And it turns out this paradise is actually the domain of his god, who it turns out when he saw Gore, was actually kind of disgusted by him. When Gore realized he was actually talking to his god, he tried pleading with him and telling him about what was going on, but the guy just did not care. In fact, when Gore walked in, they were actually in the midst of celebrating not that they're not an eternal reward for his followers, but the fact that they just killed the current wielder of a weapon called the Necro Sword, a weapon that's supposed to be able to kill any gods that wield it. However, as such, when Gore questions him and says, "Look, your empire has fallen, everybody's dead, I'm the only one left," the guy just pretty much goes, "Whatever, there'll be more followers, your whole purpose is just to worship us and die." And when Gore hears this, he's not happy. A lot of people he cared about died, like I said, including his daughter. And so in his anger, he renounces his god, which prompts his god to try to get him in a chokehold. But unfortunately, that's where the voice comes in. It turns out that voice was actually from the Necro Sword, and it sensed Gore's distress, and as he tells his god to pretty much shove it, the sword disappears from where it fell on the ground and appears in his hand, allowing Gore to stab his god squarely in the neck. The end result of this, Gore is now the chosen wielder of the Necro Sword, and unfortunately, this means he's sort of cursed. However, Gore himself does not feel cursed, and it's there as his god dies that he makes a vow that all gods will die. And as we see, he's making good on his promise, because as we saw with all those distress signals, he's been very busy, and that's where New Asgard comes in, as with the power of the Necro Sword, he's able to summon all these vile, monstrous shadow beasts that can sprout from literally any shadow. And sure enough, they attack New Asgard, which I actually like, is when we see New Asgard again in this movie, it's actually looking really damn cool. As under Valkyrie's rule, it's now become a new trading port. They've had advances in technology. They've actually allowed alien races to come in and immigrate. It's actually overall a pretty decent place, and it's actually doing very well for itself. But, however, again, that's of course where, again, Gore comes in to screw it up. And thankfully, Thor managed to pour it in just as the citizens of New Asgard realize that Gore is there and fight off his shadow beasts. But yeah, it's essentially just kind of evenly matched. However, during the battle, it turns out that there's a new player in the game. As when Thor is battling, he sees a clash of thunder and hears people cheer, and he asks Valkyrie, "Well, who's that guy?" And Valkyrie says, "Oh, you're gonna love that guy." And so she goes off to battle. Thor sees a giant monster and throws Stormbreaker into his head, until he hears a familiar whooshing. And as he looks across the battle... Excuse me 1 second. Sorry about that, I had to stop Chinny from doing something. Anyway, as I was saying, he hears a familiar whooshing, and when he sees what the source is, it turns out it's Mjolnir, repaired. It's still clearly got damage from when it was destroyed by Hela in Thor Ragnarok, but Thor is just happy to see Mjolnir again. And as it flies through the air, it gets close to him, he reaches his hand out for it, and it instead flies back through the head of a monster into the hands of another player. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the film debut of the character known as the Mighty Thor, aka Jane Foster. Just going to adjust this a little. And it's here that I should probably talk about Jane's place in the story. It turns out, before I get to that, I should probably talk about other details in the movie. For example, this movie actually tells us what happened between Thor and Jane. If you remember well, one of the complaints I did have with Ragnarok was how Jane was just kind of brushed aside and just kind of forgotten about. Well, this film actually does explain what happened to her. It turns out that the reason why Thor and Jane eventually broke up, they just kind of drifted apart. While they did have a happy relationship, had a home, did couple stuff together, just were generally happy, unfortunately, the happier they got, the more they started to kind of drift apart. Put simply, they began becoming afraid that they would start losing what they had, and as a result, they began kind of throwing themselves into their work to try and, save the world. Thor with the Avengers and Nick Fury, and Jane with her work. Unfortunately, as a result of this, they started not having as much time for each other, and the few times they did have together, they just weren't as intimate, to the point where they started arguing more walls started getting built, until one day it just ended. While Thor was away on one of his missions, Jane wound up writing him a letter and just walked out, and from there the relationship was over. Unfortunately, though, that's not where the story ends for Jane. According in her words, 6 months prior to this movie, she began getting a bit tired. She began feeling more out of place, just started not feeling well, and so the more this happened, the more eventually she decided that she needed to go see a doctor. And it turns out that she has cancer, stage 4. And while Jane has tried to, and as a result of this, hold on one second. And anyway, as a result of Jane learning that she had stage 4 cancer, she's been working night and day to try and treat it. And unfortunately, nothing seems to be working. Now, while her friends, specifically Darcy and that old scientist guy whose name I still don't remember, do try to be there for her, be friendly, be comforting, Jane herself is clearly not doing well with it emotionally. While she does put on a brave face and does try to stay strong, even starts kind of badly joking about it, it's clear that it's affecting her more than she would like to admit, especially as she keeps throwing herself into her work and continues just trying to find ways to beat it. That is until she felt something calling to her. And as she felt the call, she was drawn to her Asgardian lore books, and was drawn to the passages about Mjolnir. As a result of this, she traveled to New Asgard while they were in the middle of performing a play that told about the events of Ragnarok, with Melissa McCarthy playing the role of the stage version of Hela, which is hilarious. She wound up going to where they had Mjolnir enshrined, and what I love is that because Mjolnir still technically has the enchantment on it, they could not lift up the pieces, so they instead just carved out the piece of the ground that Mjolnir laid upon, and then just put it on display. And so as Jane goes to check on the display, the clouds around New Asgard begin to darken, and the pieces begin lighting up. And while we don't see what happens next, I already told you what happened to her. Mighty Thor. And as such, going back to the battle, Thor is actually surprised to see Jane there. And while there is still some awkwardness and tension there, it's clear that both sides are happy to see each other. Unfortunately, they can't really talk with each other under the current circumstances, so they just go back to fighting the monsters. And sure enough, in the midst of the battle, Gore does show up, and Thor does try engaging Gore in hand-to-hand combat, but unfortunately, while Thor is kind of a match for Gore in terms of physical prowess, Gore, thanks to the shadow monsters, Gore is able to kind of get an upper hand on Thor. However, during the battle... Sorry, again, Chindy. During the battle, while Gore has Thor all tied down, he tries to take Stormbreaker from Thor, but Thor manages to knock him aside. As such, this causes Gore to retreat and take his shadow monsters with him, At least that's what it looks like. As unfortunately, Gore decides to take a few, let's just say, tourists with him. In this case, he takes New Asgard's children. And while Thor and Jane try to... Sorry, if you heard chewing right a second ago, that was Chindi. Anyway, like I was saying, Gore takes the children, and while Thor and Jane try to stop him, unfortunately, he gets away too quickly. And while Thor and Jane do try searching for him, it's clear he's flown the coop, and as a result, yeah, the parents of New Asgard are kind of not happy. People justifiably start freaking out and going to the town square and begin demanding answers from Valkyrie, who unfortunately can't provide any. And as a result, things are just getting more and more hectic. And eventually Thor does manage to calm everyone down by saying he'll save the children and he'll do it quickly. But unfortunately, because of Thor so as Thor tries to pour it away using the Bifrost, unfortunately Stormbreaker doesn't want to cooperate as because Thor is showing interest in his hammer in Mjolnir, but the Stormbreaker's acting jealous. I'll get to my thoughts on that at the end. As a result, the Bifrost isn't working properly. As such, Valkyrie tells everyone to just get out of the city hall, and so Thor comes back in, and so Jane, Valkyrie, and Korg begin just kind of brainstorming what to do, as they need to be able to find the children, and they have to be able to find the children, but unfortunately that requires knowing where Gore is, and unfortunately they don't really know unfortunately it's kind of hard to track someone who can travel through shadows. Thankfully, though, they do get some unexpected help in the form of Heimdall. Well, more specifically, his son, a boy by the name of... I wrote it down, too. Where is it? Astrid, or as he says, Axel. Yeah, he changed his name based on Axl Rose. Pretty much, as such, Axel's inherited his father's sight, and so he manages to communicate with Thor, and Thor teaches him how to pretty much project Thor to where he is. As such, with Axel's power, Thor is able to kind of get a vision ghost to where the children are, and he's able to deduce the children are in a place called the Shadow Realm. It is a place that he describes where no light dares tread, and as a result, he wants to try and go there. Unfortunately, though, when he returns and relays this news to Valkyrie and Jane and Korg, they realize that it's probably not a good idea to go there, as Gore's powers rely on shadows to work. So going to a place called the Shadow Realm is probably like walking right into a trap. As such, they realize that if they want to take on Gore, then they're probably going to need some help. And so Thor and Valkyrie think they might have an idea. In this case, a place called Omnipotent... hold on, I wrote it down too. A place called Omnipotent City. Essentially, it is a gathering place of the gods. And pretty much it is a gathering place of the gods. Like, every god from every theology, it goes there. And what I love, too, is that as I was watching this for the vlog, I was wondering, well, what about the Celestials? Do they count? And sure enough, yeah, they count. There's actually a scene where you can see a couple Celestials in the city. So I actually kind of like that. But bottom line, because of this, they think that they can go there and talk to any of their gods. They can rally an army and go up against Gore. Unfortunately, though, because Stormbreaker is being, well, not so helpful, they realize they need to find a way to channel it. And Valkyrie thinks she may have just the thing. Because you see, one of the new attractions of New Asgard? A boat ride. That's not even a joke. It's got a little restaurant and everything. So pretty much they just take out all the chairs for the ride, but just put Stormbreaker on the front, get the goats that Thor was given to pull the boat along, and sure enough, they're off to the races and off to Omnipotent City. Which, when they arrive, it actually looks really damn cool, majestic, large, grand, having just layers upon layers of buildings and bridges. It really does look like the city of the gods, and it really does look majestic and just oh so delightful to witness. As such, the group manages to infiltrate this, I want to say, this meeting, so to speak, disguised as these emotion gods, and their plan is to essentially try to appeal to Zeus, who Thor openly admits is one of his heroes, as he says he based his whole thing on him. However, as they go in and they see all the gods present and marvel at some of them, including one that's literally just food, Zeus does make an appearance, played by Russell Crowe, and the dude's kind of an idiot. Essentially, he's just talking about, the gods are celebrating, like, who had the most human sacrifices done in their name recently. They're talking about where they can hold their next orgy. Pretty much the group is starting to realize, okay, yeah, this is probably a bad idea. As such, Valkyrie thinks maybe they should just cut their losses and try and get whatever they can. In this case, a weapon. As Zeus, when he tries showing off, showcases that he has a weapon called, well, the Thunderbolt, a lightning bolt that can split apart, that you can split apart, used to blast things, can be split in two for double-handed combat. Just overall, it's a very powerful weapon, and Valkyrie thinks that they can get that they should probably just take that and run. Thor thinks it's a bad idea, as even though he thinks Zeus is an idiot, he at least thinks that they should try and appeal to him, but Zeus ends up hearing their constant bickering, and he does want to know what the heck's going on. As such, Thor steps forward and does go center stage and does try appealing to Zeus, and Zeus pretty much tells him that they don't care. They are in fact aware of Gore the God Butcher, but the gods all present just think, he's not our problem. Thor tries to reason that he's killed gods before and he seeks to end them all, but they argue that, well, one, they're an omnipotent city, they're safe anyway, and two, those are minor gods, they don't count. As such, this is actually starting to piss Thor off something fierce, so he does start arguing with Zeus, and Zeus is kind of getting fed up with Thor's shit, ends up kind of latching him to center stage and flicks off his costume to see who he is, which actually flicks off all his clothes and leads to a funny reaction where all of Zeus's maidens just faint. So that's actually kind of funny. And so Zeus, realizing that it's Thor, the god of thunder, his tune doesn't change. It's just that he starts mocking him more, especially since he says, "Isn't thunder the sound that comes after lightning?" And so eventually Thor does call him out and say, "Oh, I can't believe it. The mighty Zeus scared." And this does prompt Zeus to finally get off of his pedestal, or in this case, a stage, and actually go to talk to Thor. And sure enough, he does admit that he is afraid. But like he said, Omnipotent City is safe. Gore doesn't know where it is, so he thinks that as long as they stay there, they're all good. As such, he gives Thor back some semblance of clothes, but he also tells the gathered gods, because he whispered to Thor's conversation, that everything's good and that Gore won't make it to eternity. Which does actually prompt Thor and Valkyrie to start freaking out, as when they hear that, they suddenly realize what Gore's plan is, though it makes me wonder how Zeus learned it. And yeah, this is actually his plan. We did see snippets of it when Gore got attached to the Necrosword. It turns out that at the very center of the universe is a shrine to a being known as Eternity, one of the most powerful beings in the universe, and who is supposed to be a living embodiment of the universe itself. At the center of the universe, he lies dormant, but legend says that if someone can reach his domain and wake him up, the first person to do that will be given whatever they want. And since Gore is a literal god butcher, they can pretty much guess what he would wish for if he managed to get there. So yeah, that kind of puts high priority on getting to him, not just so they can save the kids. Sorry, she's trying to chew my fingers, but also to save the gods, so to speak. Hold on one second. Sorry about that. Anyway, as such, Thor finally just says, "Fine, well, if you don't want to help us, can you at least give us your lightning bolt?" Which Zeus arrogantly says, "If you're going to call it by its name, you have to call it by its actual name, which is Thunderbolt." As such, Thor does say, "Can I borrow Thunderbolt?" And after extravagantly showing off of Thunderbolt's powers, Zeus just tells him no. As such, Thor pretty much tells him, "You know what, screw you, we'll take care of him ourselves then." But Zeus decides that Thor and his crew going up against Gore, that's a liability. They know where Omnipotent City is, and Gore could use them to potentially discover its location too. So as a result of this, he's not letting them leave. As such, because of this, Valkyrie, Jane, and Korg decide, you know what, screw this, let's go back to my plan of just stealing the thing. And it does lead to an actually awesome fight scene where Korg, Thor, Jane, all just start fighting through Zeus's guards. And it's honestly really nice. Very action-packed, very much full of effects and natural effects and hand-to-hand combat. It's really well done, fast-paced, and very entertaining to watch, but a consequence of the battle is that Zeus ends up using the Thunderbolt to end up destroying Korg's body. Sorry, but I'm just trying to get her to calm down. And while he does survive the thing, it's only his face that's saved. Yeah, apparently with Thor's species, only the mouth is alive, as he calls it. Although, before he discovers this, Thor retaliates by grabbing the Thunderbolt when Zeus throws it at him and throwing it right through Zeus's chest, seemingly killing him. Spoiler alert, he's not dead, but that's for later. As such, with him indisposed, they're able to take the Thunderbolt for themselves, but there's still the matter of getting through all of his guards. As such, Korg ends up calling the goats. As earlier in the movie, he says that there's a special note that if you whistle it correctly, can call the goats. And so he calls them, and since they're pulling their chariot, they come riding in right the hell out of nowhere, and manage to save the group, allowing them to ride out of Omnipotent City with a Thunderbolt in tow, and, well, going off to save the children from Gore. Just 1 second. Sorry, had to stop her from continually trying to bite my hand. Anyway, yeah, they get out of there, but Valkyrie admits as she thinks that they're kind of screwed. After all, they went there to gather an army, and no one wanted to help. And as such, while they do have the Thunderbolts, it's still the three of them versus this powerful being with a sword that can summon literal shadow demons. So yeah, Valkyrie isn't exactly hopeful of their chances. However, Thor tries to remain optimistic, and as such, he does try praising the Thunderbolt somewhat, though this causes Stormbreaker to sort of almost get them to capsize. Thor does go to talk to it and does calm it down. Again, I'll get to that later. But while Thor is out there talking to Stormbreaker, Jane goes out and Thor and her actually do talk. And something I've neglected to mention in the plot summary is that from the moment Thor and Jane have seen each other again, they have been nothing but awkward with one another. And while in some cases this could be considered a flaw of a movie, honestly with this one, it is good awkward. Because every conversation they have is them just trying to have a normal conversation, but unfortunately, because of their shared history and because of how things ended with them, they kind of don't really know how to respond to one another. While there is still some tension, at the same time, they're trying to get along, trying to get used to everything. And it's not helped by the fact that Thor, when he saw Jane, saw her wielding Mjolnir, his former weapon that he saw destroyed. Which, by the way, one of the things that I do like about the movie, they showcase that Thor is still worthy of Mjolnir. During a conversation that Thor had with Jane, Mjolnir was resting on a table between them, and so as the conversation ended, Thor did pick up Mjolnir, and sure enough, he's still worthy, which I like. I do like that. One of the things that I was afraid for in this movie was that Thor would be getting jealous of Jane and have to learn to kind of overcome that because he still loved her. But something I do like is that they actually do showcase that despite everything despite his feelings of awkwardness with Jane and with seeing her wielding his sword weapon, he's still worthy of it, and the fact that he still gives it to her because the fact that he's okay with letting her use it. 1 second, sorry. Anyway, like I said, I do like that they do showcase that Thor is still worthy of Mjolnir. And I like that he still is and he's okay. And I like that he's at least, despite the awkwardness, okay with Jane using it. After all, the inscription is, "Whosoever wields his hammer, if he be worthy, shall possess the power of Thor." So I do like that Thor is okay with Jane wielding it because clearly she's worthy. After all, Cap wielded it in Endgame, so whatever. And bottom line though, one last time. So anyway, like I said, with Thor. Thor and Jane, like I said, I like that Thor was wielding Mjolnir, and throughout the whole movie, and ever since they met each other again in this movie, they've been feeling awkward about things. Well, it's them going to the dark realm, to the Shadow Realm, that finally allows Thor and Jane to kind of have a moment with each other, and it's at this moment that they finally lay things bare. Thor finally does admit that he does still care about Jane, and he wants to be there for her. He wants to continue fighting by her side, and he wants to keep fighting with her. That he genuinely wants to still be with her, and that yeah, her breaking his heart did make him feel shitty, but he doesn't regret it because he does still like being with her. He doesn't say it that eloquently, but the meaning is there. And caught up in the moment, Jane admits to Thor that she has cancer, which Thor is obviously shocked by. And while Jane does try to play it off as like a joke, yeah, Thor doesn't treat it like one. He actually is very concerned. As such, Jane does tell him about how she'd been feeling ill and how the reason why she has Mjolnir is that she heard it calling out to her, and she thinks that being the mighty Thor might be able to help her. And she openly admits that she has no idea if it is, and as we see, and unfortunately, it's not. In an earlier scene, as Jane, Valkyrie, Thor, and Korg were preparing to go to Omnipotent City, we saw Jane go into like a bathroom and just it looked like she faltered, and as she dropped Mjolnir onto the floor, you saw that when she returned back to her human form, you actually saw that she looked worse. She was actually looking sicker, and unfortunately, as we see in the movie, as the movie goes along, she's not getting better. Wielding Mjolnir and reverting back to the mighty Thor does make her stronger, but unfortunately, it's not healing her. If anything, it's making it worse. More on that later. Point is, she says that she wants to keep fighting, and Thor does try to reassure her that he doesn't want that they don't know that everyone doesn't know how much time they have, and whatever she wants to do, he'll help her. And so Jane says that she wants to just go help those kids, and so Thor says that's what they'll do. They kiss. It's honestly really sweet and really nice, but the moment is ultimately ended as the group come close to the Shadow Realm. And one of the things that I like that immediately puts the Shadow Realm over something like, say, the Dark World is that when Thor said that no light dares tread here, he meant it. As the instant the group gets into the Shadow Realm, all the color just fades away. All of them end up reverting to black and white, and any color that you do see comes from light that's projected from the weapons they carry, like the Thunderbolt, Mjolnir, or Stormbreaker. So it actually looks very unnerving, but very visually interesting to see that, because it does make you feel like you've entered another world, another plane, just a place that feels off just for existing. And so the showcase that visually with the black and white, I like that. It's done really well here. As such, the group does eventually land at the center of the Shadow Realm, which is a planetoid. I don't want to say a planet because it's actually really small, but it seems to have normal gravity, and when the group arrives there, it seems relatively abandoned. They even find the cage that the kids are supposed to be in and find it empty. As such, the group continues exploring, and they find what looks like a tent or whatever in the midst of across this giant planet. And so as they begin exploring it, Jane kind of goes a little bit further in and finds the center of the tent. And in the center of the tent, she finds drawings, specifically drawings that depict the Temple of Eternity, and how the key to unlocking it is Stormbreaker. Yep, this was, in all intents and purposes, a trap, but not in the way that they felt. And so the instant Jane realizes this, she immediately runs back to Thor and Valkyrie, grabs Stormbreaker, and just chucks it as hard as she can into the sky. Which ultimately was shown to be a good move, because the instant that Jane discovered the plan, Gore made his grand appearance, and before the group has any time to fight him, he manages to entrap all of them and disarm them. As such, he begins verbally tearing apart Valkyrie and Jane about their respective crappy circumstances, but ultimately he needs Thor, as Stormbreaker is tied to him, and so he wants Thor to call Stormbreaker. After all, that's the final key to his plans. Unfortunately, Thor refuses to summon it because, well, doing that would result in the extinction of all gods. So Gore decides to use his love against him, and he brings Valkyrie and Jane back up and begins having his shadow creatures start crushing them. And it's actually during the scene that Gore does mention his daughter to Thor, how he used to believe in gods and how she died, and how at the end of the day he feels that she was a lucky one because she doesn't have to live in a universe full of these wicked gods. But ultimately, seeing Jane and Valkyrie, more specifically Jane, getting hurt like this, it finally prompts Thor to summon Stormbreaker and, well, not only free their bonds, but crack the planet right down the middle. Ultimately, it stays mostly intact, but it's clear the damage is done. It does manage to free Valkyrie and Jane and allow them to get back to their weapons, but again, since they're in the Shadow Realm, just as they thought, Gore starts summoning a bunch of monsters, which leads to an honestly really badass fight scene where Thor fights Gore head on while Jane and Valkyrie start fighting through all of the shadow monsters just bit by bit. It's really fast paced, full of such grandiosity and grandiose effects, but unfortunately, as the battle goes along and the shadow creatures are felled, Thor's side starts kind of waning, as in the midst of the battle, Jane ends up collapsing, obviously a sign of the cancer hitting her a bit harder, and in the distraction, without the backup, Valkyrie gets blindsided by Gore and gets stabbed in the back. While it doesn't kill her, it does require immediate medical attention, and as a result of this, Thor ends up getting Valkyrie and Jane to him, as well as the goats who have what's left of Korg's head, and he uses Stormbreaker to summon the Bifrost. But as the Bifrost is summoned, Gore ends up coming up under Thor, and just as Thor's about to pour it away, he manages to rip Stormbreaker out of Thor's hand, resulting in the group getting away, but Gore getting exactly what he wanted. As a result of this, the group doesn't wind up back in New Asgard, but as they just kind of literally got thrown into the void, especially without Stormbreaker there to guide them, they all just kind of crash down. While Valkyrie is immediately rushed to get medical attention, unfortunately, Jane is also in need, as she was away from Mjolnir for too long, as now she's reverted back to her human form, and unfortunately, she's barely having the strength to even move, as she tries crawling to Mjolnir, but just as she's like inches away from it, she collapses. As a result, she's immediately checked into the New Asgardian hospital as well, and it turns out that the cancer has actually worsened. For whatever reason, something has been affecting her body's ability to fight it. And Thor is able to quickly realize that something was Mjolnir. As such, Thor ends up going to Jane after taking his anger out on a vending machine, and so he pretty much tells Jane in a more comical tone, he's gonna go face Gore alone, and that he doesn't want Jane to go with him. Jane is, of course, a little aghast at this, especially since they just shared this intimate moment with them, talking about how he wants Jane fighting by his side, and how there was never any, and how they don't know how many tomorrows they'll have. All they have is today. Excuse me. But Thor does tell Jane that was before he learned what Mjolnir was doing to her, and so he tells her that he still loves her, and he doesn't want to jeopardize their future together, even if it means going at it alone. As such, he tells Jane that at the end of the day, it is her choice, and that she can do whatever she wants, but he says that he would regret it for the rest of his life if he didn't at least try to stop her. As such, with those words in mind and a farewell kiss, he takes the Thunderbolt and leaves the hospital. Valkyrie ends up staying behind us while she was treated for the stab in the back. She says she probably lost a kidney. Because of Valkyrie's weakened state, she feels she'd be more a hindrance in battle than a boon. As such, she just gives Thor Thunderbolt because, well, he's down 2 weapons. He's leaving Mjolnir with Jane in case she does want to come help him, and so he takes Thunderbolt and travels to the center of the universe. And sure enough, Gore is now there with all the children as the Temple of Eternity begins forming around them. which I admit does look grandiose and old and kind of creepy, but still kind of nice to look at. As such, once the temple is formed, Gore does use Stormbreaker and starts opening up the gate to the realm of eternity. But as he does this, it starts causing the temple to start shaking. It almost causes a statue to come falling on the kids. Thankfully, Thor is able to get there just in time and saves the kids' lives. But Gore realizes that Thor is there and decides he's going to unleash another army of shadow monsters. And unfortunately, while Thor may be powerful even with Thunderbolt, he's still just one guy. He can't fight them all at the same time and try and get Stormbreaker away from Gore. As such, he decides that he needs some backup, which leads to, honestly, one of the most awesome but most stupid scenes in the whole movie. Thor turns to the kids, tells them to grab whatever weapons they can get their hands on, and so with his godly power, he ends up casting a hex on all the weapons, pretty much stating that as long as the ones who wield these weapons have hearts that are pure and who want to ultimately go home, then whoever wields these weapons will, for a limited time only. Sorry, I should have paused there. Excuse me 1 second. Sorry again, Chindy. Anyway, like I said, he puts a hex on the weapons that says whoever may wield these weapons, if they so desire, want to get home, and as long as they have pure heart, and as long as they are pure of heart, then they shall temporarily possess the power of Thor, resulting in all of the kids gaining Thor's powers and proceeding to kick the asses of all of Gore's monsters. And yes, it is as stupid as it sounds, but I'm just gonna say this right now. It is the fun kind of stupid. Just seeing these kids kicking ass, using their weapons to just start tearing apart monster after monster, and all of them looking like they're having a ball while also being in sync with one another, just kicking ass and doing all this awesome stuff. It's so stupid that it rolls back around to being awesome, and I kind of love it for that. I cannot hate this scene. It's just so stupid that it rolls around back to being fun, and I love that. In the meantime, as such, while the kids are off dealing with Gore's monsters, Thor himself engages Gore. And while he does put up a decent fight in the beginning, unfortunately, again, Gore is kind of getting the upper hand. He manages to knock Thunderbolt out of Thor's hands, and, put simply, he just starts beating his ass something fierce. And as a result of this, Jane actually can feel it from her hospital bed. And so, as Thor is kind of getting his ass handed to her, this finally rouses her from her slumber, and when she looks over, Mjolnir's already waiting for her to grasp it. As such, as Thor is on the ground with Gore trying to plunge the sword into his face, with Thor just barely keeping it away, immediately Gore is smacked off of Thor, and when Thor looks to see what the cause is, he sees Jane riding in on Valkyrie's Pegasus with Mjolnir flying back to her hand. And when Thor sees this, he is distraught. But unfortunately, there's nothing to do. This was Jane's choice, and she chose to go out swinging. And so, as a result, Thor and Jane just start tag teaming and fighting against Gore and his monsters. And as such, during the battle, Jane ends up dealing with Gore herself, so Thor can try and get Stormbreaker with her and the monsters. And sure enough, he does manage to rip it aside, but unfortunately the gateway has already been opened. As such, Stormbreaker now free, Thor throws it to Axel, and Axel manages to use the Bifrost, manages to use it to summon the Bifrost and get him and the kids out of there. But in the meantime, there's still Gore to deal with. As such, as Jane is fighting Gore, she ends up getting thrown aside while Thor comes in and starts fighting off Gore using the Thunderbolt. But in the midst of this, Thor manages to get Gore in just the right position for Jane to grab Mjolnir, get a wind-up in, and throw it right at Thor and Gore, specifically hitting the Necro Sword and shattering it. While Gore is able to grab the hilt, Jane ends up breaking up the pieces of Mjolnir, because that's one of their abilities. They can break apart and come back together, and ends up grabbing almost as many pieces of the Necro Sword as she can and pulling it into the jumble. Unfortunately, the Necro Sword can still be rebuilt, and Gore immediately starts using the hilt to try and pull back the pieces that Jane took. And so, with a mighty war cry, Jane jumps into the air, summons a great big bolt of lightning, and slams Mjolnir right onto the floor, completely shattering it and the remains of the Necro Sword, which in turn causes the hilt to vanish and Gore to lose his powers. Unfortunately, Jane is now kind of on the ground and is weakened, so she doesn't really have the strength to summon what's left of Mjolnir back, and unfortunately, with the gateway opened, it doesn't really matter if Gore's lost the source of his powers. He's already got what he wanted, and while Thor does try to stop him, he manages to make it through the gateway, which does in turn cause Thor, Jane to go with him into the realm of eternity, and for whatever reason, it looks like the final world from Kingdom Hearts 3. Which, yeah, it does actually, it looks really nice, but in this, they do end up seeing Gore as he approaches eternity, and I actually do really like how eternity looks. It really does feel like, he looks like he came straight out of the comics, as we see an outline of a person just kind of sitting there calmly, kind of looking like they're meditating, but their entire form is made of stars and galaxies and planets. It really does look like an embodiment of the universe, and sure enough, Gore is getting ready to make his wish. Thor, at this point, realizes that he's all but lost, so he does the one final attempt to try and appeal to Gore. Tell him, I understand what you've been through. I've lost stuff. I've lost this thing. I've lost people as well, but I understand what you want, and what you want is love. But Gore is still determined to go through with this, and so Thor, just kind of realizing that he can't really do anything, and it just kind of turns his back on him. Gore first takes this as a sign of insult, but Thor admits, no, you've won. I choose love myself, and I choose to spend my final moments with the person I care about most. And sure enough, the camera does pan back over to Jane, and since she's in the realm of eternity, she can't summon what's left of Mjolnir back. And unfortunately, that means she's now back to her human form, and unfortunately, that last bout as the mighty Thor kind of took too much out of her, and she is now dying. As such, when Gore sees him choosing to be with someone that he cares about rather than continuing the fight, Thor does try one last time to plead with Gore, say, choose love, bring her back. And Gore does look like he briefly considers this, but he begins coughing, and he realizes that without the Necro Sword, he's now dying as well. However, and so even if he did bring her back, she wouldn't have anyone. But as Jane and Thor hear this, Jane does tell him she will have someone. She will be loved. And when Gore hears this, he looks to eternity, and he makes his wish. And from the reflection of the pool, we see a girl rise up, and his daughter, alive and well again, and going to meet her father. 1 second. As such, Gore and his daughter do end up sharing this little heart-to-heart moment with each other, and it's actually really sweet and nice, and in the meantime, Thor and Jane end up having one last talk with each other. It's just a nice little sweet talk where they kind of talk about the adventure they had, how Jane feels like she finally has a catchphrase, and how no matter what they do, they'll always love each other, and so they share one final kiss before Jane ends up disappearing into a cloud of sparkles. As such, with Jane gone, Gore looks to Thor and looks to his daughter, and has Thor promise to. Oh, 1 sec. Sorry, she jumped on the bed and knocked off the camera. As such, like I said, he has Thor promise to take care of her, and so with that promise, Gore dies. And so the only people left in the realm of eternity are Thor himself and Gore's daughter. As such, the film kind of cuts ahead as we end up seeing the aftermath of everything, and it turns out that things are kind of getting better. With Jane's sacrifice, New Asgard has erected a statue of her to honor everything she stood for, and so as such, her memory is continually on is still being, and so she's still being remembered to this day as the hero she was. The children of Asgard will return safely, but Valkyrie has started instituting mandatory self-defense classes in the off chance something like this ever happens again. As in the terms of Korg, he managed to ultimately reform his body, and during one scene he mentioned how members of his species reproduce, and it's by one rock creature and another rock creature singing together, holding hands over a pool of molten rock for a month and creating a baby boy. And so it turns out that he met someone named Dwayne, who, yes, has a mustache, and yes, I do think it is supposed to be a play on The Rock. Ugh, I just realized the pun. I hate puns. And as for Thor, we actually see that, yeah, he made good on his promise, and he is now taking care of Gore's daughter. And it turns out that being a child born of eternity comes with some perks, as she now has laser vision. As such, Thor is not really putting up with her antics or any of her normal kid stuff, but he is trying to be a good father. He does treat her with love, treat her with respect, and he is trying to teach her to be a warrior, just as he did. And so we see this in action as the film ends with the ship that Thor and Gore's daughter are on, landing on a planet where a war is about to break out, and Thor motioning towards some stripy people and says they're nice people, but they need to be protected because they can't fight for themselves. And so Thor gets ready for battle. The girl gets all prepped up herself. Thor picks up Mjolnir, now reformed and drawn on by the little girl, before he summons Stormbreaker and hands it to her. And so the film ends with them charging into battle, jumping into the air, and letting out a battle cry before coming down with Guns N' Roses' Sweet Child of Mine playing over it. It's honestly a badass finale, and I love it. But since this is a Marvel film, that's not where things end. Like I said, there are actually 2 after credit scenes, and this is where we get back to Zeus. Yeah, again, he didn't actually die when he got impaled by his own thunderbolt. In this case, he's lamenting how, in the olden days, people used to pray to the gods for their sorrows or pray for miracles, but now whenever they look to the skies, all they want to see is their superheroes. As such, Zeus says that if they want to be feared again, they need to make an example, and that example they think is going to be Thor, Odin's son. And that scene ends with Zeus saying, "Do you understand this, Hercules?" And it cuts over to see Hercules listening to Zeus's plan and saying, "Yes, Father, I do." But then after that, we get our actual after credit scene, and it turns out we cut back with Jane. As yeah, she did die, but she died as the mighty Thor. Well, kind of, sort of. She was in her human form, but I'm guessing she was able to accomplish enough feats to be considered a god still. And so it turns out that when she died, she had done enough so that she could be in the realms of Valhalla. And who was waiting for her but Heimdall? And yeah, I still gotta give my respect to Forrest Whitaker for playing this role, despite the fact that he has openly admitted that he does not like playing it. The fact that he has kept coming back for every Thor movie and reprising the role, the dude's got my respect. I don't care what his reasons are for coming back. Maybe it's because he's under contract. Maybe it was because it's a paycheck. Maybe he was promised that it was just a cameo. But bottom line, the dude still has my respect. I hope he's doing well for himself, and I'm sure he's getting a lot of better jobs. Bottom line, Jane has made it to Valhalla, and after that, the film ends with the text, "The Thor will return." So, yeah. Final thoughts on the movie? I liked it. I want to stress this right now. I genuinely liked the movie, and at the end of the day, I do feel that it was a fun time overall, and I did thoroughly enjoy myself. With that said, I think the movie is very flawed. And before I start talking about what I think worked about the movie, I think I should talk about what I think didn't. Because unfortunately, those flaws did hamper my experience with the film quite a bit. And the first things first, the humor. While in Thor Ragnarok, I did genuinely enjoy the humor, and I thought that the jokes that they had in the movie were actually well timed, very fit with the characters, and actually led to some very funny scenarios. And when they were actually introduced, in this film, it's kind of a mixed bag. While there are jokes that do genuinely make me laugh, and I thought were clever and fit with the scenario, there are also some jokes that made me roll my eyes and that just cringe. I think I have two examples with me, and both of them involve being in New Asgard. One of the scenes is when everybody is freaking out after Gore steals all the children, and so Thor has to immediately calm everyone down and dissuade their fears and assure them that in these times of crisis he'll go and he'll step up and he'll save everybody. As he's doing this, though, he ends up repeating statements, and the reason for this is because Meek, the bug alien from Ragnarok, is taking the whole speech down, and so Thor is distracted throughout that and stops and says, "Really, why are you doing that?" It's like, really, why are you doing that? I'm in the middle of a speech here. I didn't really find that funny. If anything, I just kind of found it annoying, especially since they do emphasize that this is a very serious situation, that these are children who were in the hands of a psychopath who has admitted that he wants to kill all the gods. I think at this point, I feel like you kind of need to prioritize where the humor should be here. And on top of that, another cringy joke was when Jane had her freak out after Jane had to take a small break and we saw how bad she was. After that, in her anger, she picks up Mjolnir and smashes the sink. And Valkyrie comes in and sees this, and while she does realize, when she knows what Jane's going through, but tries to assure her it's fine, and so she does show her what she's getting for battle, and what she's bringing to get ready for battle, and one of them's a mini speaker, which, yeah, I don't find that, her bringing that along does not really feel funny. It's kind of cringy, kind of feels dumb. And then of course, I think this is one that leads to one of the dumbest jokes and running gags throughout the movie, the rivalry between Mjolnir and Stormbreaker. For whatever reason that I cannot begin to comprehend, Taika Waititi decided to have it be that Mjolnir and Stormbreaker were alive, so to speak. Now, in previous films, it's never been implied or showcased that the weapons were alive. I guess maybe if there was maybe a slight implication, especially when they say that in order to wield Mjolnir, you have to be considered worthy. But the thing is, for whatever reason, Thor actually talks to his weapons like they're real people. And they in turn react to that. Like, in the flashback section when we saw Thor and Jane just kind of sharing all their happy little moments together, there was one scene where Jane was sleeping and Thor was just kind of caressing Mjolnir and saying how Jane was precious, and as he talks about how much he loves her, and how much he also talks about how much he loves Mjolnir and cares about it, and how he wants Mjolnir to protect Jane, which does actually wind up slightly enchanting Mjolnir to protect Jane, which probably explains why it was calling out to her when it was. But the fact that he was actually caressing it and talking about how much he loved it honestly kind of felt cringy. And throughout the whole film, they continue emphasizing this with Stormbreaker apparently being jealous that Thor is interested in Mjolnir, as during the scene in the town hall where all the parents in New Asgard are freaking out, Thor tries calling out to Mjolnir, and instead Stormbreaker just kind of slides up to the side, which initially the scene is funny. I did like that scene, just kind of it coming in like it's a jealous ex-girl, like it's just like, hey, were you calling me? I thought that was funny. But then throughout the movie, they further emphasize that Stormbreaker is jealous, as when Thor tries to use the Bifrost to get away, it intentionally crashes him into an arch, which I thought was stupid. And then after that, and then in a later scene, Thor is talking about how awesome the Thunderbolt is, and then the ship wavers because Stormbreaker heard that, And then another scene as after Thor has his talk with Jane and gives her back Mjolnir, it just slowly slides in. It's like, it's a fucking axe. It doesn't think. And again, part of me, you can partly blame this on the weapons, because in the case of Mjolnir, there was an enchantment put on it, and that enchantment probably could follow certain rules and expectations. Someone probably has to fit the qualifications for what counts as worthy in order to utilize Mjolnir's power to its fullest extent. But in the case of Stormbreaker, it's literally just a magic axe. There is no enchantment on it. It can do a lot of kick-ass, impressive, awesome stuff, but it's still just a giant axe. That's all it is. So why the hell is it reacting the way it is? Why is Thor talking to it like it's a girlfriend or that it's alive? It's a fucking axe. It can't do anything. I don't really understand why this running joke is in there. It's honestly not that funny and honestly just kind of cringy. Why is he talking to his weapons like this? I don't understand it. It's weird and I don't like it. It's just, it doesn't make sense to me and it's not funny. And another example of this, unfortunately, and I'm really sad to say this, is Korg. Korg doesn't really have to be here in this movie, which I hate to say because he actually was a nice side character in Thor Ragnarok, and even here he's still played by Taika Waititi. But ultimately his only real contribution to the story was the whistle with the goats, and while I still find him ultimately likable by the end of the movie, and it's nice to somewhat see him every now and then, you'll notice that throughout my vlog I didn't mention him that much, because the biggest contribution he has to the plot is the goats. Beyond that, he's kind of pointless, and a lot of his jokes as the comedic relief don't really hit as hard as they should. They're best supposed to be like observational humor, or just meant to be him kind of being the dry wit of the group, but it doesn't really fit as well. If anything, it's just kind of bland. It's just as cringy as the rest. It just does not work in my opinion, and as a result of this, it really does fall flat and doesn't really add anything to the movie. He really does feels like they're tried to have heavier emphasis on him, but unfortunately, because of how the humor in this movie is so mixed, it just sort of fell flat, and as a result, the character of Korg did not really kind of felt superfluous in a sense. And that so as a result, ultimately the comedy is a mixed bag. Some jokes actually do land, but others are cringy, feel out of place, and just kind of take away from the seriousness. And I'm sorry to say this, while I do like seeing films in the MCU have a sense of humor about themselves and trying to have fun with what they're doing, at the end of the day, they have to take themselves at least somewhat seriously. While I do love Thor Ragnarok and how much the jokes worked in there, what helped make them work was the fact that the film did take itself seriously enough. They emphasized that Hela was a genuine threat, and that the longer she spent in Asgard, the worse things were getting. And that while the Grandmaster was treated as a joke villain, he was still enough of a legitimate threat that he constituted a problem and an obstacle for the heroes that they needed to overcome. They still showcased enough seriousness in the movie. And on top of that, even what the film was named after, the Ragnarok, they treated that with weight and gravitas, and they showcased that it wasn't a decision taken lightly. And so, seeing this film be mostly jokes, I'm sorry to say it doesn't always work. It feels like they're not taking this seriously enough. Now, to be fair, there are still serious moments of the movie that they do treat well. And I'll get to those that I talk about, the positives. It's just that with this film, they had a very heavier emphasis on comedy than in previous movies. And as a result of that, it feels like they're taking these moments that should be serious, that should not have jokes, and just stuffing jokes into them where they don't belong. And as a result, it doesn't make the jokes feel funny. It makes them feel forced and leads to serious mood whiplash, which I'm sorry, but I don't like. I think that's stupid, and as a result, it kind of detracts from my enjoyment of the movie. Unfortunately, this also leads to another problem in the movie, the pacing. One of the problems that I've heard described about this movie is that it doesn't really have a lot of heart to it. It feels kind of bland in certain regards, and while I wouldn't say it lacks a lot of heart, I can kind of understand that to a certain degree when it comes to how the story is handled. It feels just as Thor: The Dark World felt like filler because of how by the numbers the plot was. It's a similar case with Love and Thunder. It feels by the numbers with its plot threads, and and the way things go along, and because of the heavier of a sung comedy, serious stuff feels like it's just kind of pushed aside because they want to because they want to get to the next set piece, they want to get to the next action sequence, they want to get to the next important plot detail, and as a result, the story doesn't feel like it's as it feels like the story doesn't take as much time as it should, and as a result, certain emotional investments don't feel as certain characters don't have as much emotional investment in their arcs as they should. And one of those people that unfortunately suffers is Thor, and that is another problem with the movie. Thor's character arc. At the beginning of the movie, one of the arcs that they're trying to have with Thor is kind of like meant to be an extension of his character arc in Endgame, trying to find himself, trying to open up, and apparently after having lost Jane, he's kind of kept people at an arm's length. And to a degree, I see that, especially if you do try to consider what happened in Infinity War and Endgame and how badly losing to Thanos affected Thor, and how ultimately getting another chance to take him down did help him. And part of the reason he was traveling with the Guardians of the Galaxy was to try and find himself. But the fact that they're saying that Thor needed to find himself, to a degree, I buy it, but not so much. It genuinely does feel like that. It feels like that Thor trying to find love and open his heart. I feel like that's oversimplified because they did make it clear in Endgame that despite all the shit Thor went through, he still has a good heart. He still wants to do the right thing and help others, and so I feel like, and he does still want to have friends. He still wants to be there for everybody. It's why he still travels with the Guardians. It's just that for whatever reason, they're trying to make the breakup with Jane be the more central focus. Now, to be fair, Thor has gone through a lot of shit. And like I said, part of the reason he's traveling with the Guardians is because he's trying to process everything and come to terms with it. It's just that when you try and it feels like it's kind of simplified down to Thor needs to learn to love again, and that and ultimately him encountering Jane is supposed to be what helps him do that and open up. And I'm sorry to say this, that arc is not really handled well. I feel like and unfortunately, the reason for that is Thor and Jane's reactions to each other. While I do genuinely like how their relationship is handled in the movie, because I do like their little awkward moments with each other, because they do clearly still feel attraction for one another, but don't really know how to approach each other, don't really know how to talk with each other in a less formal manner. And as a result, it does kind of lead to some cute moments where they're trying to hold a civil conversation but failing miserably. But as a result of this kind of awkward conversations, it doesn't really feel like they're getting a lot closer. And it's only when Thor finally says to Jane near the end of the second act that he still loves her and that he wants to get back together with her, that we actually see progression in their relationship, especially when Jane admits to Thor that she has cancer. And like I said, that's kind of the biggest development we see of it. Before that, we just kind of had them awkwardly talking with each other. And one of the things I do like is that they both kind of contributed to the breakup. So I do like how it's not one side versus the other. They both kind of were at fault. They both are pushing each other away. But at the same time, while that was a nice moment, and while those moments are kind of cute because it does showcase they do love each other, and I do honestly think they're justified considering the history in previous movies, at the same time, having them at the same time, when you start the arc there and then just kind of feels like and then have it go and progress at this moment, it feels like you skipped a few steps there. And as a result, I have to unfortunately say one of the problems that with the movie is probably Thor and Jane's relationship. Personally, I do like it. It's cute, it's awkward, it's nice, but ultimately there's still love and caring there. And when Thor and Jane do bare their souls to one another, it actually is a sweet moment as they reconcile and make it clear that they want to be together again, but still holding problems but still creating a wedge when Thor learns that Jane's cancer is being accelerated due to Mjolnir. As that's actually some heartfelt moments that does lead to some legitimate character drama, and I do like that. It's just that again, because of how rushed Thor's character arc is, the relationship does not feel as fully developed as it should be. It's developed enough in my opinion, it's developed enough so that you can still get some nice cute moments in there, and I feel like the ultimate sacrifice in the end I think is heartfelt. The final conversation that Thor and Jane have with each other is honestly genuinely sweet and nice and well handled, especially as Jane's dying and she and Thor are talking about her accomplishments, and she says not bad for a mortal and he says not bad for a god. I like that. I like that a lot. It's just that when you have to look at this objectively, it could have been better, and I think in some cases it probably should have been more thought out. So while I personally enjoy it, I may have to unfortunately not make that a knock against the movie. So I'm sorry in that regard, because I did legitimately like it. But with all those faults aside, what makes me still enjoy this movie despite them? Well, for starters, the action. Oh, sweet merciful mother of God, I love the action in this movie. The action is so damn impressive, and if that's one thing that's carried from Ragnarok to this movie, it's how impressive it all looks, especially with the thunder, the lightning, the quick movements, the combat, using weapons creatively, going up against these monsters that all look honestly very hideous and well designed and can sprout from the shadows and grab people, seeing them summon lightning, get into hand-to-hand combat with their weapons, being coordinated when they're in teams. It actually works really well. And while I did just say that Korg probably felt like a superfluous character, when in the battle that in Omnipotent City, he and Thor actually work very well off of each other. They actually supported one another, and I actually do buy why Thor reacted the way he did when Zeus destroyed Korg's body. It actually worked really well, and all of the fights in this movie are just so damn fun to watch. They're full of effects and so forth, but I feel like there's enough actual hand-to-hand combat to keep things interesting, and it's so it's so fast-paced without feeling rushed, and I genuinely like them for that. And again, if I had to pick a favorite, my favorite would have to be the scene with the kids. It's such a stupid and fun scene that I can't help but love it. And it looks like the kids are having a ball while they're doing it, so I'm just gonna say, I genuinely loved it. And I know that kind of feels weird to say, especially considering that I just said the film has a problem with pacing, but keep in mind I said the humor's a mixed bag. Some of it works, some of it doesn't, and it's just that scene I think was one of the moments where it worked, and it worked beautifully. And this isn't a knock against the kids themselves. I don't hate the kids. I don't hate kids. But see, and like I said, one of the reasons I enjoyed it is because it looks like they're just having fun. But again, it's just, you have a group of kids given the powers of Thor. There's no way you can take that fight seriously. As such, I do like that. And of course, I suppose, like I said, some of the jokes actually do work and do get a laugh out of me. Seeing Melissa McCarthy come in and play the stage version of Hela was genuinely hilarious, and I will always find that funny and nice to watch. And at the same time, and of course, another thing I like are, of course, the effects and the designs. I love the designs in this movie. While the film doesn't have as many while the film does have some relatively small areas, especially with New Asgard, there's still a lot of visually interesting set pieces that keep you drawn in and want to see more of the world. New Asgard actually looks really damn impressive the first time you see it, as it's grown from the simple sea shanty town that we saw in Endgame into a thriving port city. There's a lot, as we see floating ships, parlors, different races coming together, all these races coming together, all these different kind of shops. It mixes old-fashioned with new. It actually works really well, and in my opinion, does make for, admittedly, an interesting site to look at. And on top of that, the new sites we've seen in this movie even work too. Omnipotent City looks fucking glorious. It really does feel like a haven of the gods, where the gods can just rest and relax. And like I said, I like seeing the variety of different gods in Omnipotent City. And again, I repeated this, but I liked seeing that they actually did acknowledge that there are multiple gods in the MCU. Because when it comes to comics, all theologies are correct. So seeing not only these gods that from all these different pantheons come together, but especially seeing those two Celestials who are just kind of peeking into the chamber as everyone's having their big talk, I like that. It actually acknowledges that the Celestials are still a big deal in the MCU. So I like that acknowledgement. I just like that. And then, of course, again, the Shadow Realm. I loved how the Shadow Realm looked. While I did compare the pacing of this movie to like the Dark World in terms of how the plot moves along, I could also I think one of the improvements again is that while the Dark World didn't have as much in the terms of interesting sights or their new worlds, Love and Thunder trumps that in many. Love and Thunder trumps that at every turn, especially with the Dark World, especially with the Shadow Realm, because because like I said, what makes it visually appealing is that no light can come here, and the instant everybody goes in, all the colors all fade away. All the colors fade away, not little by little, but just enough to make you showcase. But it does showcase that they're entering this other world, like they're not part of the natural order anymore. Just seeing it all go away and seeing that, and just having it all be so quiet and have the sounds be so slightly muted, it feels so off-putting and weird, but it also feels very creative and sets a mood, really draws you in and wants you to, and makes you want to see where things go. And I like that. I legitimately like that. And that's the result. It does, and as a result of that, it does still keep me interested in seeing how things go whenever the main characters visit these worlds, as I do want to see more of them and how they work. Then, of course, another aspect that I like, Jane's arc. While Thor's arc, I think, felt a little rushed in certain areas, Jane's arc, I think, is handled perfectly. I like how because the very first scene we see of her is her getting chemo. And like I said, while people are trying to help her and try and tell her maybe you should take it easy, her reactions showcase that she's not exactly wanting to listen. She's actually like she tries playing everything off, but she's fighting, and they showcase in the movie that part of the reason why she's fighting is because her mother went out the same way. Her mother also died of cancer, and one of the last things she said to Jane was, and I did write this down, whatever happens, never stop fighting. And that's part of the reason why Jane keeps going throughout the movie. How despite the fact that everyone tells her you need to take a break, you need to stop, she just keeps going. Why despite everything she's getting desperate? Why she goes to Mjolnir when it calls out to her, and why despite the fact that Mjolnir is not healing her, she still keeps using it. Because with Mjolnir, even if she is still weak, as the mighty Thor, she's strong. She can fight. She can take on monsters. She can save children. She's not a frail human on death's door. She's a god protecting the people of the world. And as a result of this, it makes her arc just that much more tragic. Because as the film goes along, you just see her get weaker and weaker. And while she does keep trying to put on a brave face and is trying to still do the right thing, you can see it affecting her mentally. When the first scene we see her go into the bathroom and drop Mjolnir, and you see her revert back to her human form, and she just looks so weak and frail, that you actually do see, oh, you're not getting better at all. And so when she picks up Mjolnir and she expresses her rage by smashing the the sink. I don't know why I forgot that word for a second. It's a nice visual way of showcasing her own anger and contempt of the situation, but also showcasing that she wants to keep fighting. And as a result, every time she gets weaker, every time she seems to falter or get weak as the mighty Thor, she just keeps brushing it off. And it ultimately makes her sacrifice at the end that much more influential, as despite everything, even knowing that Mjolnir is taking away her own strength to fuel it, she still wants to keep going because she wants to just keep fighting, even if it means that she herself may end up dying, which is probably another reason why she was considered worthy of Mjolnir. Not just because, Mjolnir felt that she was worthy, not just because Thor put an enchantment on it, but also because she wants to keep doing the right thing despite her situation. And I actually do really like that. It's handled maturely, it's handled well, it fits with her character, it gives her a lot more interesting arcs than just being the backup that supports Thor or gives him the emotional investment. It puts her front and center as part of the action, and it really does work well and fits with her character. So that's another thing that works with the film. And then finally, the biggest thing that I think works towards the film, besides the action and the effects, Gore the God Butcher. This guy is hands down a fantastic villain. The film not only is he developed well with the reveal of his backstory and how he learned his god was a self-righteous pompous jackass, but also there's also bits of tragedy and sympathy with him losing his daughter, and as and while his and every time and as a villain, oh my god, he is honestly threatening and creepy. Because of his powers, the way he moves around is always either slow and is always slow with methodical movements, or moving in the shadows and just appearing and reappearing wherever he wants. His movement, he's as a fighter, he's fantastic. Whenever he talks, it always looks like it always looks like it's methodical, like, oh, what did we have here? The way he speaks is just so twisted and dark, and every time he talks, it sounds like he's barely holding on to sanity. One of the scenes that I legitimately love about him is a scene where the kids are trapped in his cage and Axel is telling stories about Thor and how he took off Thanos' head, and so Gore just pops in. It's like, oh, I want to hear this story too. You like hearing about heads? Here's Octi. He loves having his head ripped off, and when he does, it just scares you. It's like, what? You don't like it? You were all thrilled about it before. Well, don't worry, Octi's gone. Just throws him aside. It just looks like he's having a fun messing with the kids, but at the same time, though, you have no idea if he's aware of what he's doing, or if he's just that insane. Like, you don't know if because ultimately his goals remain the same. He genuinely believes that the universe would be better without gods, without wicked gods corrupting the natural order of things. And his motivations for that are still there, even in the midst of his insanity. As during that same scene, he talks to one of the kids and says, "You remind me of a girl I know. She was brave, strong, loved to draw." You can just feel the pain in his voice as he says that. But there are just as many moments in the film that show him just barely holding on to his sanity and just seemingly slipping into the madness that the sword gives him, as he just seems to take delight in screwing in people and hurting them just because he can. It honestly, it makes him look so unnerving and so creepy. It makes every single scene with him just that much more memorable, and it makes me invested in seeing where he goes, what he does, how he goes about things, and just makes him creepy. But by the end, you do feel enough sorrow for him, because by the end of the day, he was just a man who cared about his daughter, who prayed and prayed to a deity he felt loved him, only to learn by the end that the deity cared jack shit for him. And so in his anger, the sword called to him and corrupted him into this monster. Again, it works so well, and Christian Bale plays it perfectly. The way all the inflections, every single creepy movement, the sorrow, the sympathy, all of it works so well with Gore. And another aspect that I think works is the makeup they use for Gore. He looks so, like, after he wields the Necro Sword, his skin gets all chalky white, and it looks like he's actually a walking zombie. And another little detail that I like is that before Gore turned, he had these tattoos on his face that are meant to emblemize the god he worshipped. After he turned, he has scars all over where those tattoos were. Just another nice little visual way of showcasing that he's just slashing out every bit of dedication to the gods he can. I love that. It honestly works, and it's a nice little visual indicator of his characters and it matches up with his motivation and his backstory. And by the end, when when Thor does talk him into ultimately giving up on hatred and using love, by the end, it actually feels natural. Because even in the midst of his insanity, he still missed his daughter, and so without the Necro Sword corrupting his thoughts, it allows him enough clarity to realize, I want her back. And so he uses his last wish to wish her back, and knowing that even though he's going to die, she'll be safe in the hands of a god that does care. And as a result, it leads to an honestly sad moment when he eventually does die. As it's a nice little reverse of what happened with him and his daughter. Because, yeah, they do show the scene where she dies, and it's just fucking horrifying. So, yeah. I like that. I like Gore. He's a great villain, a very sympathetic backstory. Honestly, a creepy design, creepy powers, just great acting of Christian Bale. It's just overall a great performance, and it's a great and it really is a high and it's a really big highlight in the movie. So overall, while there are factors in the film that do hold it back for me, the fast pacing, the sometimes overabundance of humor and how it can be mismanaged, certain superfluous characters, and unfortunately Thor's arc and how it doesn't really feel as fleshed out as it should be, there is still enough there that I can safely say I had a good time. The action is damn impressive and still makes great use of the effects. The environments honestly look so nice and sleek and work well. While Thor and Jane's relationship does kind of feel rushed in certain areas, it does lead to a lot of cute moments that I genuinely do love, even if I do have to admit that the relationship could have been developed better. And ultimately, Jane's arc throughout the film honestly feels very sympathetic, and her actions throughout the film really do make you want to see her come out on top, despite the fact that she is slowly losing her life to cancer. And of course, the villain is just friggin' awesome. Creepy, terrifying, but yet sympathetic and tragic. And so as a result, while there are factors that do unfortunately hamper the movie for me, I can safely say that I still had a fun time, and I think I can say the film was just alright. Not perfect, but at least alright. And in my opinion, I think that's good enough. It doesn't have to be a great movie, it doesn't have to be a fantastic movie, it just has to be entertaining, and Thor Love and Thunder was that for me. Now, if I had to rank it in terms of the other Thor movies, I feel like at the top I would still put Ragnarok, as I still feel like that was the best movie. Then after that, I would put the original Thor, as like I said, that it was still pretty good despite how things kind of dragged in the second act. Then I would put this film because while it does feel rushed in certain areas, it still has more to it and enough heart so that I can still say it's entertaining. And then finally put at the dead last, I'd probably still put Thor: The Dark World as well. That did have a few aspects that I enjoyed. Overall, it was still just a dull experience that ultimately is just a filler. So yeah, on the whole, I did enjoy Love and Thunder. It's not great, but overall, I still had a fun time. And if you think you'll have a fun time with it as well, then go by all means, go in, watch it, and I hope you enjoy yourself. So yeah, that's about it. Thank you for watching. I'm Samuel Johnson. Like I said at the beginning, apologies for the technical difficulties with Chindy. She's a curious puppy, and she wants to keep exploring, and if you know me, then you might know that I don't like technical difficulties, so be glad that I paused when I did. But with that out of the way, next week we're going to be going back to Steven Universe, and we're going to be talking about Mirror Gem and Ocean Gem. But the next time we venture back into the MCU, we are going to be going back to Wakanda as we see how this great African nation adapts to losing their prince in Black Panther: Wakanda Forever. I hope to see you then, and take care.